So does the media's coverage of this propaganda and of these choreographed destructions have to do, is this motivating ISIS? As some academics have claimed, did ISIS destroy Palmyra simply to get the media bump? Well, there's some disturbing evidence from the ground gathered by sources who are communicating with the ASOR group. And here's one, it's rather chilling. These sources claim to have overheard ISIL commanders comment that attacking the ancient monuments makes the whole world talk about them. This seems to suggest that ISIS is being motivated by the press it's getting, and that the purpose of this destruction is not religious as much as it is propagandistic and attention-getting. What to do about this in the face of this? This has led to debates both within the journalistic community, but also within the community of experts who we rely upon to report accurately about what's going on. And I've been a part of some of these conversations, and they're fascinating and somewhat troubling. I've simplified the arguments and distilled them into some bullet points. There's not consensus, but generally two camps on the left and on the right. On the left, some people after Palmyra in the expert community have concluded that the press is part of the problem, and that our sharing of ISIS social media led directly to the destruction of Palmyra. Therefore, experts should not be speaking with the press, and it does no good to comment on the destruction of these sites. And also the publication of any images related to this destruction should not be distributed or used in any way. Others in the expert community believe that it is dangerous to no longer comment on this because it leaves ISIS as the only one speaking, and that if we don't talk to our journalist friends, they're really going to get things wrong, and that it's mistaken to think that we're the primary audience for this. That debate is still raging today. It's important to point out clickbait is not the only type of media going on, and so when we think ahead about what are the ways to do this more responsibly, we should look to some of the examples of media that have really done a good job. I mentioned the Washington Post series on propaganda. I would point out to you that in their coverage of propaganda, they are not just highlighting ISIS, they are also highlighting propaganda efforts by the American government, which obviously is also spending its resources trying to frame this issue and convince us of certain messages. The New York Times has done a good job analyzing the causes and the reasons behind the cultural heritage destruction. And BuzzFeed, that bastion of clickbait, has done some very important investigative reporting on the ground in Turkey, with a reporter putting himself at considerable risk to inform us about the use of antiquities trafficking to fund ISIS. There we go. Some other positive things coming out. Social media can be turned against those who create those images. There is a growing movement of people involved in verification and open source intelligence. The most noteworthy of these is Bellingcat, which was founded by a British house father named Elliot Higgins, who has now become something of a celebrity because of his rather obsessive analysis of social media to crack some rather big cases, including Assad's use of barrel bombs on civilian populations, the likely use of a Russian Buk in the shoot down of the MH17 aircraft, and several other stories that he was way ahead of the media on by looking at social media, by looking at YouTube videos, and doing a very close analysis of this. This should be a model to the rest of us out there about ways which we can use social media to find the truth. Mainstream media are also using crowdsourcing in these similar tools. This is The Guardian's The Counted series. I encourage you to look at it. We don't have records of people who were killed by police in this country. The Guardian is creating this record with the help of you and me and everyone else who contributes. I am involved in an effort working with some of these social media companies to use crowdsourcing to track the illicit antiquities trade, building a database of repatriated objects and then using that to analyze smuggling networks around the globe. Some parting thoughts for us to chew on and to complicate things a little bit. As Omer, the quote from Omer in the previous presentation, I had the same quote in my presentation. I think it's worth thinking about. His suggestion is that ISIS is not a medieval iconoclastic entity. Rather, it is a hyper-modern entity, one that is very savvy at using social media and other modern tools to communicate its message. Another question is, what is the goal behind their destruction? Are we the audience or are we not the audience? Are they speaking to a local community or are they really focused on the international community? We like to think that we're the audience, but oftentimes we're not. Why is it that the killing of Khalil al-Assad and the destruction of Palmyra has garnered the public's attention in a way that the killing of 300,000 civilians in Syria did not? Why is that? Who has done the most harm in Palmyra, ISIS or the West? I would remind you that if you look at your local museums, there are many Palmyran statues on display there. None of those were removed with permission of the government. In some ways we're thankful to have them, but in some ways we should also look at ourselves and the role that we've played in cultural heritage destruction. And finally, to what extent does our fetishization of ancient objects and ancient monuments fuel one of the main funding sources, or one of the funding sources, I should say, of ISIS, which is the illicit antiquities trade, which exists to feed our desire for these precious things and to have them in our museums. That's my presentation. I look forward to your questions.
Oh, you got 10 more minutes.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Let me go back and make a few more.
All right, thank you very much, Jason. So does anyone have a question or maybe elements of answer to some of those questions?
Just with regard to the first one, is ISIS medieval or hypermodern? A contention. It's neither. It's early modern. Our society has a very deep-seated habit of projecting our abject of modernity onto the prior dispensation so as to export it. That's what modernity does. That's what we do with iconoclasm by calling it medieval. There was no iconoclasm in medieval Europe between the 4th and the 16th century. It's not medieval. It is early modern. And
why is it early modern and not hypermodern? Whatever hypermodern means.
It's early modern revolutionary and therefore sets the pattern for revolutionary activity ever afterwards. So it's certainly hypermodern, but it's an aspect, it's a claimant to modernity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not medieval.
I would agree.
I think, Ilaria?
Thank you. This was really, really nice. I have a question about the last two questions that you posed to everybody.
Yeah.
I think they're really important questions to think about, and I absolutely agree. And I guess my question to everybody would be then, now that we are counting the numbers of all of these artifacts that we're buying back from them, and we know the amount at which we are contributing to ISIS, now that we understand this, what is our response to that? Are we going to respond? And are the museums going to finally agree with this point or not?
I think it's a great question, one for a representative of a museum to answer. Here's the microphone, sir.
I just want to say something. There's one of the positive aspects of this presentation. It also responsibilizes. That, yeah, sure. Makes sense.
You coined a phrase.
Almost every individual in like how to decide to access news information. Like so. It might be as simple as fighting ISIS or Daesh, destructions. It's like and not buying into their strategy might be as simple as it's a bit absurd, like not clicking on the link that's providing you with this absurd picture and trying to go for better informed like sources of news, right, or different approaches to the news and contributing to projects such as some of the ones that that Jason presented.
One of the questions I left off there, but it was implicit in my presentation, was should we be treating the beheadings of humans differently from the destruction of cultural heritage? Should the media try to effect a similar self-censorship as we did after the beheading of Foley? Should we be doing that with these heritage sites? We're not doing that right now. Maybe we should be doing that.
So I think there's a lot of material for discussion here. We'll have Clare Gillis presenting some concluding remarks, and then we'll just dive right into a larger Q&A. So save the next questions for later. Thank you again, Jason.
Thank you.